guess I should adjourn us from executive session and make sure that the regular meeting is called to order. We've done the flag salute. We've done the roll call. If you will please stand and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I use your phone to take a picture? All right, next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda, and if there are no changes, the agenda will stand approved as written. Next item on the agenda is a proclamation for the 2020 Census Awareness Month. Whereas an accurate census count is vital to determining where to locate schools, child care centers, roads, public transportation, hospitals and other facilities, and for making decisions concerning business growth and housing needs. And whereas more than $800 billion per year in federal and state funding is allocated to states and communities based upon census data. And whereas census data ensures fair congressional representation in the U.S. House of Representatives and in the restricting state legislators, county and city councils, and school and voting districts. And whereas the 2020 census will create jobs, stimulating economic growth, and increasing employment opportunities in our communities. And whereas information collected during the census count is protected by law and remains confidential for 72 years. And whereas April 2019 marks 1 year until the beginning of the 2020 census. Now I therefore, David Baker, Mayor of the City of Kenmore, Washington, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby complain April 2019 as 2020 Census Awareness Month in the City of Kenmore, and reiterate City of Kenmore's commitment to partnering with the U.S. Census Bureau to help ensure a complete and accurate count in 2020. And I understand we have Ellen Bellera from the U.S. Census Bureau here. There we go. I don't think people really understand how important the census data is for the state, for the communities. All right. Next item on the agenda. I'm scanning the room, but I'm not seeing.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am so pleased to introduce you to Rita Moreno, who began city employment 1 week ago today. She is the recreation coordinator, and this is a new position, term-limited position, part-time, that was approved in this last year's in budget for the 1920 biennium. We are just thrilled with her experience, and she's made a big difference in 1 week on the job. She comes to us from the Northshore YMCA, where she's been for several years. And before that, she was involved in recreation programs and events production at City of Fircrest in Pierce County, and then also in the state of Arizona. Because we are a little short-staffed on events right at the moment, she is working some extra hours to begin with to help us get up to speed on planning the summer's events, and has just stepped right in and just really contributed from day one. So I'm very pleased for you to meet her, and I know you'll enjoy working with her.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to dig in and kind of get to work and bring some recreation activities to Kenmore. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. I had the pleasure of meeting you a couple of days ago, and it's good to have you on. And I'm certainly looking forward to working with you here this next summer, especially with all of the events that are going to be going on this summer. So it's great to have you on board.
Thank you.
And we've got a tremendous staff, and I know they're making you feel welcome, and you, I'm sure, will fit right in.
Thank you.
It was some of the first things on Rita's schedule is to meet with the providers of the recreation programs that use city facilities. So with KWAC last week, and we have other meetings set up, and so we're off to a really good start.
Yeah, I agree, and she's also going to be working on a recreation guide and a centralized place where we can see all of our recreation providers on our webpage and all those things. So, welcome.
Yep. I'll tell her applause is just a daily occurrence when you work for the city of Kenmore.
All right. Got a real treat tonight. Our next door neighbor, Kirkland. We have the city manager here, Triplett, and we're certainly glad to have you, Mr. Triplett, and we're looking forward to hear what you've got to say on financial stability.
Your Honor, do you mind if I say a few words before I turn over to Mr. Triplett? You've been talking about financial sustainability for quite a while. At your last city council retreat, we had a good discussion about it. While the city has been adopting balanced budgets, which is a good thing, our most recent forecast predicts that operating expenditures will exceed revenues as early as 2021. So we need to engage the community and have a conversation about this. To begin the process, at our last retreat, you directed us to invite a couple of our neighboring cities over to talk about what they've done. So we're really fortunate to have Kurt Triplett, City Manager of Kirkland, here tonight to talk about some of his insights and experience with the city of Kenmore when it comes to, with the city of Kirkland, when it comes to financial sustainability. Say what?
They both start with K.
That's right. That's right.
So take it away.
Okay, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. It's just a true privilege to be here. I got a chance to see your new town center. It's fabulous. I got to have a chance to have dinner at the Seaplane restaurant. So it's my first time to experience that. So you've done some really cool things that you should be proud of here. It was neat to see it. So as Rob said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Kirkland's experience. The great news is you guys already have a fabulous staff. I get a chance to work with Nancy Ousley on the Arch Board, and so we learn as much from Kenmore as you can learn from us. So what I'm going to tell you is just a little bit of our experience and some lessons that I've learned, and about 15 minutes of slides, and then I would like to open up for a dialogue, so please feel free to ask any questions that you have. A couple things that I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk just a little bit about Kirkland as a thriving city right now, because what I want you to know is this isn't just theory. We have a similar shortfall coming, and for a variety of reasons that I want to talk about. So we're trying to live this out, not just talk about it. The second thing I want to cover is really the framework that Kirkland uses, which is we call it the Kirkland strategic anchors for our financial stability in our budgets. And that's really the age-old challenge of how do you balance your community's wants and the thing you need to provide them with the resources that you have or the resources that you can get, right? So that's what we all struggle with. And so Kirkland uses 3 strategic anchors: the price of government, our community survey, which we then call the Kirkland Quad, and our financial forecast. And the 3 of those work together as our foundation. And that leads to our city work program, which I had a chance to pass out, a document I'll talk about in a second. And then I'll wrap up with some thoughts on financial stability. And like I said, then I welcome the conversation. So like all cities, we went through a major comprehensive plan update process in 2015. So we adopted what we called our Kirkland 2035 plan. And one of our council operating values is community engagement. And so we went out to the community and we asked them, what do you want the Kirkland community to be in the year 2035? And the more times we got an answer, the bigger it shows up on this Wordle. And so our community wants a real walkable, vibrant, green, connected, livable community. And so our council, based on that, is we have a pretty progressive smart growth comprehensive plan where we want density in our core Totem Lake and downtown linked by transit. And one of the things that we all hear from the public is there's a lot of growth happening on the east side and the north end. Is anyone in charge of all of this? And so one of the things that we like to make sure we emphasize is that while this growth is happening at a pace we did not expect, it's happening the way we want and it's happening in the places that we want. So in our Kirkland 2035 plan, we pretty much plan for everything conceivable in the city. And the great news is we wanted our growth in downtown, which is happening. We wanted our growth in Totem Lake, which is happening. But just to give you some perspective, we have about 56% of the growth we planned for 20 years has happened since we adopted that plan in 2015. So we're on an extraordinary historical pace in Kirkland. So it's all the right places, all the right ways, but happening at a pace we never expected, which is causing some opportunities, but also some real challenges. Just a couple, these are a couple schematics that have gone through our design review to sort of tell you how the city of Kirkland is evolving from a community pretty similar to Kenmore with a lot of single-family residences to really, we're starting to see development we've never had in Kirkland, which is these big multi-use retail with commercial on top and surrounded by multifamily apartments. So this is our new village at Totem Lake, most of which is open, but we have a second phase coming. This is our Kirkland urban project downtown. This is actually going to start opening in June of this year. You've probably seen it go up if you've had a chance to be anywhere near downtown Kirkland. This is another example of apartments, mixed use over retail, residential over retail that's happening in Kirkland. This is also in Totem Lake. This is a senior apartment complex. We're seeing townhomes for the first time in decades happening in Kirkland. I know there's a project, I think, that's close to the Kenmore border as well. This is a new type of development for us. And then finally, this is just another example of downtown. This is right next to the Kirkland Urban Project, and this is a former hardware site, which is now going to be 15,000 square feet of retail with 171 residential units on top of it. So I wanted to give you that just as a very quick overview, because when my mayor, Penny Sweet, gave her State of the City speech, she said the city of Kirkland is booming. That was her. The state of the city is booming, and it really is. But to serve this kind of growth takes a new kind of fire department, a new kind of police department. It has tremendous impacts on our infrastructure. It has a lot of impacts on our park system. And so we're trying to figure out as a city, how do we meet that need at a pace that this growth is occurring? And so we start off with our strategic anchors. And so this is the first one. And this is our price of government chart. And the price of government basically is a book that you can buy and you can read. It's a fairly technical document. So I let my deputy city manager, Tracy Dunlap, who has a degree in this, do the calculations for me, and then I just get to talk about it. But the price of government basically takes all of the revenues you take from your community. So that's not just taxes, but it's also utility bills. And it places that over the average income of your community. So the numerator is all the revenues you take as a city. The denominator is the income of the city. And basically what the book says is that a typical city that number should be about 5 to 6%. So if you are basically taking about 5 to 6% of the revenue of the income of your community, you're just about right in terms of service provision. Now this calculation changes for each city. So all you can really do is compare against yourself, but the number 5 to 6% holds, but everyone has a different sort of set of revenues that they take. What the book goes on to say is that if you're in that 5 to 6% range, generally your community is pretty happy with you, and they feel pretty well served. And that if you're creeping above the 6 to 7, 8%, they get a little cranky. They feel a little bit overtaxed. They feel like maybe there's some efficiencies or changes that you might want to be making in your government. The book also says if you're below that 5%, your community may be willing to invest. So they may be more tolerant of you coming to them with a well-thought-out ballot measure or a new revenue source, like, say, a head tax or something. So the price of government really just gives you a sense of how affordable your current services are, and then it really starts to inform policymakers is, Are you too high? Are you too low? Are you just about right? And that gives you another set of choices that you can make. So what this shows here, the Kirkland chart, I should always point this out. So the all revenue chart is the red line, or at least it's red on mine. And you can see that Kirkland's actually been hovering at about 4% for quite a while. We actually went even down below that for a while. So we have tested this theory twice, and it worked fabulously well the first time, and it flunked dramatically the second time. So in 2012, using that really low price of government, the city of Kirkland went out to the ballot for a park levy and for a street levy. And both of those passed at about 56% of the vote. And this was still coming off of the recession when people were still struggling. Filled with confidence, we then went into 2015, also at a price of government about 4%. We decided that we really needed a really nice aquatic center for the city of Kirkland. And for other reasons as well, but that ballot measure failed 66% to 33%. So the price of government is not the only metric, and it doesn't replace a well thought out, thoughtful ballot measure that has a lot of community support. But as we are looking to 2019 and 2020, this metric is really important to us as we think about what we might do next. But that's our first strategic anchor. Our second strategic anchor is around the Kirkland Quad, and it starts with a whole huge amount of community outreach. And our city council, as I said, has adopted an operational value of community engagement. And so those are just some examples of the things that we did. The first is the Kirkland resident survey. And I had a chance to talk to Rob about this a little bit at dinner time. So every 2 years, the city of Kirkland does this survey leading into our budget process. So we do it in the spring of the year that we actually do our budget deliberations to help us adopt our budget. In addition to that, we did all sorts of other ways to try to get people's input on our budget. So we had a series of town halls. There was a big focus last year of community safety and gun safety, launched by the Parkland shootings that happened in February. We came up with some cool ideas we tried to do at our farmers markets and others. We actually had a budget exercise. Our goal was to have 100 people play this little budget game, and we actually let them be the city council and move money around. So we gave them $2 million to play with and said, what would you do with this? We also let them move money from departments to other departments, and we tracked all this. We actually ended up having over 200 people play this. We got some really interesting input from that. Short answer is almost everybody moved money to affordable housing and homelessness. So very compassionate community. And then we followed up, wanting to do a ballot measure, we followed up with a second survey. But the way the surveys work turns into what we call our Kirkland Quad, but I just wanted to show you what was sort of top of mind for our community, because I'm guessing it probably are the similar type of top of mind issues for Kenmore as well, which is, no surprise, growth and traffic and congestion and all those issues related to those kinds of, there's too much happening, it's happening too fast, we're feeling clogged, we're not feeling like our transportation system's working very well. And so that was really what came back to us again and again and again as the top of the mind. What Kirkland does in our community survey is we have this list you see here of major services that we provide as the city of Kirkland. And so we ask them every 2 years, how important is this service to you? So you can see, like at the top, community events. How important is it to you that the city help provide community events? How important is it to you that we provide police services? How important is it to you that we provide services for people in need? And we get a rank on that of order of importance. And what won't surprise anyone again is that police and fire, our fundamental public safety departments, are the ones that always score the highest in importance. In Kirkland, interestingly enough, garbage and recycling is almost always number 3. It's really up there towards the top. People really like to recycle in Kirkland. So we always find that kind of be fun. We then go back through on the survey and we ask them, of these services, how well are we doing? What is our performance? And we then take that grade and we lay it over the importance. And in theory, the way this should work is we should be doing about as well in performance as is important to people. So what you want to do is you want to be at around that 100% level, right? So people say, police matter to me the most, and you're performing great in the police department. Or emergency preparedness matters a lot to me, and we think you're doing a fantastic job. And so when we lay those things together, orders of importance and performance, you get this little chart here, which shows you places where you're exceeding people's expectations. That's the green area. Places where you're about where you want to be, and that's the blue. And then places where people are saying, you're not even meeting our expectation. This matters a lot to us, and we don't think you're doing a good job. And The things we tend to score the lowest on, which is also not unique to Kirkland, is traffic and traffic congestion and affordable housing. So affordable housing, we actually asked for the first time in this survey. We had not asked that question before. And it actually gave us our lowest score that we'd ever got on the survey in terms of performance. So people are very much feeling affordable housing is a big issue. So this is just an alternative way to look at that information, but this is how we put it in our budget document. We call it the Kirkland quad. It's just a quadrant chart. And that dotted line is where theoretically performance and importance come together. So if everything's in and around that line, then you're doing a pretty good job. And so what you can see here is the blue dots, you're doing a good job. The green dots, you're actually exceeding expectations a little bit. And then the red dots are the places you really have an opportunity to improve, or your public really wants you to improve. So in our budget process, we really start to zone in on those and say, what is it that we can do as a city in our budget process to try to do better? And in 2012, this maintaining streets red dot was even higher up in a lower performance. And so it was actually one of the reasons we put a street levy on the ballot is we actually used the Kirkland quad. Our public said, maintaining streets is extremely important to us, and you're doing a terrible job at it. As we had a lot of potholes in our arterials. We used that to place an issue on the ballot. It fortunately passed, and we've actually done much better since then. So the maintaining streets has been moving closer and closer to the line, but it hasn't got there yet, so we still have some work to do. And helping people in need and affordable housing continue to be something that the community is really interested in seeing us do more about. So now you know if you're affordable, now you have a sense of what people think you're doing well and what they want you to do. So what happens next? Well, you have to find out how much money you have, right? Because if we had limitless money, we would make everybody happy and move everything over to the right side of the chart. And so what we do is our third foundational document is our financial forecast, which I think Kenmore does as well. And so we look at not just the next 2 years that we have to balance by state law, but we try to look out 6 years and say, what's coming? Okay, so this is our actual financial forecast from our budget that we used. And what you can see in the year 2020, we're doing okay. In the year 2021, 22, we start to have a funding gap. And the funding gap is really due to two things. The first and the biggest one is that in 2021, the city of Kirkland is going to lose an annexation sales tax credit that we received from the state when we annexed the Kingsgate, Finn Hill, and Juanita area. That's about $4 million a year of our general fund. So in 2021, it's just gone. Now, we've been preparing for that for 10 years. We knew this was coming, so we've been doing a lot of work on that. But you can see that's really the first thing that starts to create the gap. But the second thing, which I know is a challenge that Kenmore faces as well, is just that wages grow faster than the revenues we have in the Washington state system. So the gap starts getting much wider than the annexation sales tax credit. So I put all that together, the big growth that we have, the annexation sales tax credit, the other challenges we face, and kind of the framework to start to lead you to then, okay, how do we make decisions for our own financial stability? We'll talk about the next. So what we really try to do is balance all of this. And so when we have our retreats, our budget retreats, we talk in great detail about each of these three strategic anchors. And then we look at this and say, how are we going to solve this? And so obviously to fill your gap, you either have to bring in new revenue or you have to reduce expenditures in some way. And that's basically the rest of the conversation. What I recommend at the very end, which I talk about, is that the key to us, where we've been successful, is to actually have our city council vote on these things by resolution. And we started doing that when I came in as the city manager back in 2010. And what we found is that there's some power in the fact that it's actually an adopted document, because councils change, sometimes city managers change. Don't ever get rid of this one because you got a really good one here. But it's helpful to be able to look back at what you adopted because it's a permanent record and you can see why you did it and you can see what you did, and then you can obviously always amend that in the future if you need to. But one of the things we did for the annexation sales tax credit is we knew it was going to expire, and so we actually adopted an 8-year reserve replenishment plan. And we said that for 8 years we're going to set aside 1% of our budget to replenish all the reserves we used in the Great Recession. And so we adopted that resolution R4900, and so when we started our budget process, the first thing we did is took 1% off and stuck it in the reserves, so before we even did anything else. Adopting it through resolution is the reason we're able to do that, because we just kept referring back to that. Oh, and by the way, the 1% required by R4900 is over there. That's right, so the council can always see it, the council can change it. And then, getting towards the end here, the city work program. So what we started doing then is adopting a city work program, again, by resolution. And I had a chance to go a little bit through your website, and I saw your city council goals that you have on there, very similar, sort of important, thoughtful investments that improve the quality of life of your community. So I thought that list was really good that you guys have on there. But we adopt ours by resolution every 2 years right after the budget process. And I think there was an example of the whole work program in your council packets. But this is just a shot of Resolution 5356, which we adopted recently. What I also included, just as a handout, was we do a little score sheet of past work programs. So you can see what we've adopted in the past. And I should never let city managers do their own staff work, but I went through and I highlighted on this for you all places where we actually put on the work program to seek new revenue. So, or to adopt budgets. So you can see the pink highlights. We talked about adopting efficient budget that provide cost-effective services. This was coming out of the recession. That's in the 2012 work plan. And the 2013-14 work plan, we talked about a cost-effective budget that maintained our AAA credit rating and an improved performance management system. So by adopting these, the council was giving us direction for the next budget, but doing it through a resolution that basically made it much more formal as to what our targets are. You can also see in 2012 is when we adopted a work program that said, figure out if we should do a street maintenance levy or a park levy. And we did a lot of polling as a result of that and community outreach. 2013, we said we would partner with Lake Washington School District about an aquatic center. They were not that interested, so they said to go to the ballot. So then in 2015-16, we put that measure on the ballot that I talked about, and as I said, it failed dramatically. But we learned a lot from that. And so in 2017-18, we talked about exploring a potential fire station ballot measure. And as we began to go out to the public during this exploration, this was the time when the city, all cities were affected by the levy swap that the state of Washington did to fund schools. And so what we heard from our people is we just passed Sound Transit, this levy swap just happened, we are not interested in property taxes at this time. And so we actually deferred this measure as a result of the public feedback that we got. So on the 1920 work program that we adopted, one of our actual 12 items, number 12, is actually to prepare for the annexation sales tax credit expiration. And so the direction is to come back with a specific series of measures that will close that gap. And we've done some already, but so this means I'll be developing 10 or 12 actions, such as maybe it's increasing the head tax a little bit, or maybe it's charging for parking at some of our downtown parks, or maybe it's reductions that we find in certain places in the budget. So those are the kinds of things I'll bring to them as a list, and then the city council will go through that as we start our budget process. So this is a little hard to see, but I just wanted to show you that there's no magic to any of this. It takes many, many little actions to bring these diverging lines back into balance. And so we went through and did a big list of everything that we had done leading up to the 17-18 budget. And like most cities, we've sort of overturned every rock that we can. We've done some ballot measures, you can see. We've taken our 1% property tax. We have maximized our utility tax. I know that's something that the city of Kenmore hasn't done, but that's something that we did a while back during the recession. We have done some interesting things to conserve our sales tax that's made us a little more balanced. And then we've done some things in negotiations with our labor force. We are a full-service city, so we have 650 employees, so we provide our own police, our own fire, a couple things that you contract for. So that was a big cost center for us, and so we're able to make some reductions now. So we've done many, many, many things to get there, but there's always a big thing or two that you want to do at the end. And so one of our big things that we're looking at now is the potential for a fire capital and operations levy in 2020. And that would be to upgrade our current fire stations, which are, they were seismically sound in the 1970s, but they haven't really been touched since then, and also to look at whether or not we need to enhance operations in order to meet some of the needs of this growing city that I talked about. So it's a very quick overview, and then I just want to leave some final thoughts, and then I'll be happy to talk about anything or answer any questions. There's many different ways of doing budget processes, and I think all of them work well. What it really comes down to, unfortunately, is the hard choices that the staff recommends to you and the hard choices you have to make to balance. And those hard choices are either to change what you do or to bring in new revenue to keep doing it. And so there's really no magic around that. But what I have found is that for Kirkland, what works is, regardless of what your process is, you need to come up with a plan together, and you need to come up with that plan with the community. And then our recommendation is adopt that plan formally through some kind of legislative action. Because that adopted plan then becomes something that you can take out to community and stakeholders and say, this is what we did and this is why we did it. And so that's where you really communicate it far and wide with your community. And then the hard part, you got to stick with the plan. There are many times our council said, what if we just took that 1% to reserves and we just did this with it? And we'd say, hey, you can't do that. If you do it now, you're not going to have it when the annexation sales tax credit expires. Review the plan regularly. I mean, every 2 years, we go back to these work program items and say, do we want to change anything? And we actually even do it in the mid-buy as well. And then you can change your mind. You know, where you have a new council, you can make a change, but if you make that change, our recommendation is change that too through legislative action. So again, you can track it, and then you can hold yourself accountable to it. So that's a very, very high level of what we do at Kirkland. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Curtis.
So we use a system called priority-based budgeting. Are you familiar with that? And
I am aware of that, yes.
how does it kind of fit with what you do?
Yeah, so it's a budget process that can work very well. It does a lot of the same things. It sort of makes you decide what matters to you. We actually looked at that. The city of Redmond, next to us, and the city of Bellevue had started budget by priorities or outcome-based budgeting. At the same time, we started looking at this in 2011 and 12. And so we actually evaluated that. We made the decision not to do that at that time, but mostly because as we were looking at the main outcome that we wanted, which is not necessarily what other cities wanted, it was our council really said what matters to us the most is not our process, it's our citizen outreach. So they ended up deciding that what they'd rather do is really focus on going and asking the public what they wanted. And so we shifted our focus into that. So we've kind of kept that community outreach engagement piece to the forefront of our budget process, but budgeting by priorities works very well. It's the same thing in a different way, but how you decide what your outcomes are is always the hard part, right? So,
All right, thank
but
you.
it can work very well as long as you know why you're doing what you're doing.
Councilmember Smith.
I appreciate it, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff. Even though it's high level, it's got some fascinating ways of presenting it, and I really like the quadrant thing that you set up through, and that was EMC Research that did that. And
Yeah.
Can you tell me approximately what's the cost that when they go through that gap analysis?
Yeah, so
what that
we spend about
entails?
$30,000 every 2 years on that.
Okay.
It's gone up a little bit, but it started off about 25. It was 32,000 what we did in our last budget, and I think we set aside 35,000 for the other one. So about every other year. So it's not too bad when you're doing it
Okay.
every other year.
And then I had one other question. The fact that obviously your revenue makeup is a little different than ours because you have a much more diverse economy. And does your percentage change at all? When you talked about when you hit 6-7%, that's kind of a max, but that's of total revenues. And I'm just wondering how that relates to a city like ours that is more property tax dependent, and how that total revenue package could hit our citizens at a higher percent than maybe in Kirkland.
So I know that Tracy has talked to her about how the calculations are done, so I don't know if you've had a chance to do that yet. So I'm not sure where Kenmore would come on that.
Well, as an example, when I looked at your total revenues on your budget, it looked like the tax portion was about 50%, or give or take a little. And ours, it looked like it was closer to 75%.
Yeah, that could be.
And
yeah.
so it made me question how we would look at that differently.
So it's the cumulative amount. So whether it's one or two different funding sources, it's really the total amount of taxation you're taking versus the income. So some of it's outside of your control. If you have a high income community, your price government will be one thing. If you have a lower income community, it'll be another. And it doesn't really have anything to do with a decision made by the elected body. But my guess is one of the things of if you do have a property tax-based system, it's not going to grow as fast because it can't, unfortunately, under state law, right? So my guess is you'll have a fairly stable number if you went back and did the calculations, but whatever it was, it probably wouldn't move up or down a lot. Whereas with Kirkland, we have a little bit more up and down because sales tax is somewhat volatile. And then also the utility tax is a little bit more volatile than property tax. So we're about a third of those three big funding sources for our funding. So it's a great question. I just
Okay,
have to-
and then if, kind of on that, if you don't mind, if I just can follow up on that part. So the fact that you're more of a full-service city than we are, being, contracting significant parts of our needs and requirements, how does that impact that percentage as well? Or do you just look at it as a revenue stream and they have their own revenue and expense
So the
ledger, like
the
just like we do?
methodology would allow you to do either one as long as you do it consistently. So
Okay.
you could choose to include, so for example, I know like part of Kirkland, you're with Northshore Utility. So in our methodology, we include that, but you don't have to. So what people pay as a utility bill to Northshore, we would include.
I see.
But you could choose to include it or exclude it as long as you do it consistently over time. So
Okay.
it's really up to the person doing the
Great,
calculations.
thank you.
Councilmember Marshall.
What have been some achievements for parks in natural areas?
Some of our achievements? Thank you. So when we had sort of the twin recession and then the annexation, we took a city that became almost double in size. The downside of that was we were already laying off parks people, and the upside of that was we got all these wonderful new parks from King County at the same time. And so our park ballot measure was really an attempt to deal with both of those. So one of the things we did is we took over and stabilized the Denny Park, which is pretty close to your border. And Edith Moulton Park, which is also on the north end, is a huge park that was very underdeveloped. And so we were able to really invest in both those parks and make them much more user-friendly for the community. And then we were also able to restore quite a bit of the parks maintenance that we had to cut in the Great Recession. So our parks have really stabilized. We've been able to make some parks purchases, but not as many as we wanted. And that's something that we're looking at kind of in the future is after this issue of whether we do a fire ballot measure, my guess is where our council and our public will go next is to look at some sort of park levy to maybe bring in new parks or to maybe invest in artificial turf fields to get better usage out of the existing parks. So we know that's something that we need to do in some way because of all the new population and this new growth. But it was a ballot measure. It was our public saying yes that really helped us do that.
Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, I have another question, Kurt. On page 10 of your presentation where it has the graph with the price of government, I'll wait till you get there. There it is. So I assume when you see that blue line then you interpret that as meaning that your citizens would be willing to absorb a little more taxation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so then your council then looks at that and you're on the same page because you're looking at that
Right.
and you're saying, look,
Right.
we were steady and now we're decreasing and so
Right.
therefore, okay.
So we remind them of how the price of government works because we sometimes have new council members and give them the theory of it and then suggest this means our public might be open to additional revenues. But as we learned from the Aquatic Center, if you still don't explain well what they're going to get for it, they're not necessarily going to pass something just because you have a low price of government.
Okay, thank you. And last comment I wanted to make is I like the idea of the legislative approach through the resolutions. I think that's a nice way to kind of encapsulate for future councils, like you said, what sort of the thought process is. That's interesting. I've never seen that quite like that.
What we found is that councils are very collegial and they don't necessarily always want to contradict each other, right? So if you don't adopt something, they all take a different meaning away, and no one really said, well, I don't really agree with that priority, but I didn't really say anything. And so everyone sort of assumes all the priorities are moving forward together, and the poor city manager is like, that's not what I heard totally. Yeah. So what adoption by legislation does is it forces the conversation and the vote. And generally, ours have been unanimous, so it doesn't mean it's more contentious, but it really does sharpen the focus of a council. Oh, do we really want to create that new commission? Or was that just a really good idea from a resident that maybe we can't afford, right? So I think that's the value that it brings.
Councilmember Curtis.
So this has to do with the levies that you request. It almost sounds like Kirkland sort of admits there's not quite enough money to go around.
Absolutely.
And so every few years, if we see a long-term need, we'll sort of package up something that's going to help us make this all work. And it might be parks, and another year it might be fire.
Right.
Some years it might be roads, and, you know, it wasn't the aquatic center. But it sounds like that's almost part of your formula, your big picture, that you're going to need some extra income to make this thing work. Am I reading that correctly?
That is correct for the most part. When we do the forecast, we sort of do it in two ways. We talk about new revenue would be optimal, at least if I'm the city manager and I'm trying to make sure that I provide the services the public's expecting, right? But we also talk about, here would be our strategies if you wanted to see a reduction. So in 2009, 10, 11, and 12, even though we used some of this format in 11 and 12, we used it to make reductions or to make reallocations of services. So it's not always new revenue. But the difference is, what we don't say is, public, if you don't vote for this, I'm going to cut that, right? So that's sort of the hold the public hostage. This process is sort of designed to try to get away from that. But yes, in general, because of the way taxes are limited in Washington state and mostly property tax based, this diverging line sooner or later is going to get every city. It just comes, whether it's 2 years from now or 6 years from now, it always comes. And so you are forced with, what do we do about that? And reductions are definitely one way. In addition to this, in addition to looking at potential new revenue sources, I've also given all of my directors direction that by June, I want to see what their other ideas would be if the council of the public didn't choose to go to the ballot. What would we offer up as ways to reduce or reallocate? So we've used the same process to do things like lower COLA increases for employees, as an example, or to change how we do healthcare. So we've made some other big changes that are about the cost side, not just the revenue side. But you're right. We do think you run out of money every couple of years, and you have to have a strategy for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You
Very
bet.
much.
Well, I really think it's great that you're doing this because, like I said, you have a fantastic department. You have a great staff. We love working with them. So I think you already have a lot of great ideas. But this is how we got better, is we asked other people what they did, and we tried to take the best of it. But everything is unique to your own city. So I just wish you well, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's a great privilege.
And thank you for working with us and the partnering that we're doing on a couple of things.
Yes.
We really appreciate the camaraderie that our two cities seem to have and working together with you. So thank you very, very much for being open to that.
So have a wonderful evening. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Next item on the agenda is the City of Kenmore partnership with K4C, the King County Cities Climate Collaboration. Mr. Sawyer, our Environmental Services Manager.
Good evening, Council. So I am here to introduce Rachel Brombaugh and Megan Smith with the King County. And they're going to provide a short presentation and update on what's going on with K4C. It's been about a year since they were here last when they introduced their organization and talked about getting Kenmore to participate with the organization, which in December, Council decided to go ahead and do. So in January, we became a member of the organization, and I have them here to kind of get us up to date and provide some more information about K4C to the Council and the community. So with that, presentation's up. I will hand it off to Megan and Rachel.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having us back tonight. I'm Megan Smith. I'm the Director of Climate and Energy Initiatives for King County, and I'm mostly here to say on behalf of Executive Constantine, we really appreciate Kenmore joining this partnership. We now have 16 cities in K4C, plus the Port of Seattle, so over 80% of residents in King County are living in a local jurisdiction that's part of this collaboration. So when we came to you almost a year ago, we talked about kind of the nuts and bolts of what is K4C, what does it mean to join, what's the cost share, and what we wanted to do tonight was come back and share some highlights of recent joint work amongst those cities in the county, including some really exciting late-breaking updates from the legislature today. We've been doing a lot of work on state legislation jointly. Highlight 2 elected official summits we have coming up this year, and kind of put those out there and hope you can join us, and also to talk through some of the cost share work. So we have about $50,000 in cost share revenues from the interlocal agreement that supports K4C. And Rachel has been doing a lot of work with city staff to figure out what's the best investment of those dollars. So I'm going to hand it off to Rachel Brumbaugh as our primary presenter, and I'm also happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor Baker and the council for having us. I do want to have just a quick recap of some of the things, the topics we went over. It was actually last June, as a refresher, and then we will dive into what we've done mostly in 2018, what we're looking at in 2019, and opportunities to be engaged. I'm happy to take questions in the middle, or if you want to wait to the end, either works for me. So, as Megan mentioned, we are now 16 cities, 1 port, and of course the county. Kenmore is no longer the newest member. We are happy to also have welcomed the city of Lake Forest Park, your neighbor, to the collaboration very recently. We're very excited about that also. But the cities and the county, we comprise 80% of King County's population, about 1.6 million people. And we continue to grow and attract interest from other cities who see the work that we're doing and want to be responsive to their constituents and want to look for ways to save money and be good stewards of the environment at the same time. So again, a little bit of review of what we talked about when we were talking more intently about why Kenmore should join the K4C, and we continue to see, really, if you go straight to the bottom line, ensuring that our individual local actions have a bigger impact. Sometimes as a medium-sized city, you might feel that it's just my voice, what does that matter? And I think we'll go over several examples where we can show that that collective voice really has a much greater impact when we speak as one voice. At both at the elected level. At the staff level, we're able to really connect and share goals and our learnings, measure our progress, convene that, and just really understand what the different challenges are. Even though the cities, like we just saw with Kirkland, might be very different, some of the challenges are the same. We look to raise the profile of climate work, and that's something I'll speak about in some of the communications we're working on for this year. It seems to be more and more in mind of our residents and constituents, especially as we've had a couple summers with really bad air. So that's something that's growing dynamically too, and we're able to really address those and help with that. And again, staff training and expertise. We have events. I'll speak a little bit more how we can share and increase the knowledge base of staff, especially staff that might be doing 2 or 3 different roles within a smaller city and might not be able to spend full time on climate energy issues. And then, of course, engaging elected officials such as yourself. You have a very strong voice that is listened to, and I can attest to that in the state legislature and in utility regulatory hearings, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So there's plenty of opportunity to really dive in and use your voice. Again, a little bit of refresher. Our shared climate goals, both at the county and all 39 cities, are to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2050, and it's 30% or 50%, excuse me, by 2030. And so when all the cities and the county agreed to that through the Growth Management Planning Council, we then took that, the K4C took that and hired New Energy Cities to map out how would we get there. It's great to have that North Star or that Northwest Star, but figure out what can you actually break that down into, because if you don't break it into steps, it's hard to visualize. So you can see we have our wedge analysis here. that has both some federal and existing state regulations. And then once you look at 15% cleaner transportation fuels and below, those were mapped out as methods to get to the overall greenhouse gas emission reductions. This chart is a little dated. We are going to be updating this chart as part of King County's 2020 Strategic Climate Action Plan update. So we are working on this now to understand what does that wedge look like, what has changed, what hasn't. There's been significant change at the federal level. There's also some change at the state level. So we're trying to figure that out, and that will help guide both the county's individual goals that we will be developing, but it also helps frame out our joint county-city climate commitments over there on the far side of the screen, which derive from the wedge analysis. And they are both policy and catalytic pathways to reduce emissions in all segments there, both in transportation and land use, energy supply, green building, consumptions and materials management, forest and farming, and then also, of course, on our own operations, because we believe that one needs to lead by example. All right, so let's get into what we've been doing. It's been a busy couple of years. So we've been working on a bunch of different technical analyses. One is the Clean Electricity Pathways Study, which we may have mentioned when we were here before. That is a study that looks at, if you go back to the, I don't have a pointer, but the 20% increase in renewable electricity, which we've translated that to be a 90% renewable electricity goal. It looks at how do we get to that 90% renewable electricity goal. And it maps out investments that local governments and policy that local governments can take. And it also looks at the importance, the crucial importance of state level action. And that has spurred a lot of involvement by the outreach committee that I'll talk about in a minute. So that's a study that's available for anyone to look at. It's something that we discussed in our building on. We're also working, as I said, on our countywide greenhouse gas inventory to see where are we, what needs to be addressed, what has increased, what has decreased, what story does it tell, and how we're managing our countywide emissions. And then Scope 5 measurements. Scope 5 is a software platform that several of the cities within the K4C use to really look at their emissions, and you manage what you can measure. Over to the right on capacity building and funding, we host work groups for fleet managers in order to look at both cutting cost and cutting emissions in the fleets that we operate. We have a revolving loan fund, which is a city's fund to reduce energy demand, which would enable cities, any city, to borrow from the county in order to fund energy efficiency or renewable energy projects. And we also have a bunch of green building tools for getting to lowered emissions and lowered cost in the green, in the built environment. Going kitty corner down the communications, we're working on, again, constantly trying to tell the story in a way that resonates to residents and constituents and businesses. And with that, we'll go over a couple things that are listed on here. I don't have a copy of the Scope 5 dashboards. I'd be able to share that at some point if you'd like. But we've developed a customizable infographic, and I'll show you that on the next slide. And some case studies, which I also show you on a couple slides later, which speak directly to the work that individual cities are doing. The elected official action, this is what I think might be of interest to you, one is Green Direct, and that is a green tariff which allows us to buy renewable electricity from Puget Sound Energy. And this is something that the K4C elected officials years ago were meeting with PSC regularly and saying, we want greener energy supplies. We love electricity. We want it to be greener. How can this happen? And we have a certain regulatory construct in the state, but PSC, to its credit, came up with a special tariff that we supported through the Utilities and Transportation Commission proceedings, and now it's been available out in 2 different offerings, is completely sold out, but it allows, we have coordinated on the development of a new wind facility down in Southwest Washington, creating 300 construction jobs and 5 permanent operating jobs. That's the forecast, it's not up yet. And then a solar facility closer to Richland, I believe, where there's much better solar resource that is being built also. And so we will be buying that electricity when it comes online. And we continue, I say we, the elected officials, continue to press PSE for more renewable options. It's also been a legislative session, in case you've been following. And we have been working with a group of elected officials who have been very involved in the session and have gone down several times to Olympia and have testified and promoted really supported work that aligns with our K4C interests. And I'm happy to say, actually, you know, it's a great Earth Day present that today the 100% Clean by 2045 bill passed completely through the legislature, and it is on its way to the governor's desk. And I'm pretty sure he's going to sign it. So that's great, and that's just it takes a lot of people to get that done. There were a lot of stakeholders, but the voice of the elected officials that were working on it was really important. So I'll speak a little bit more about that later in some of the other bills. So this is the infographic that I mentioned, and I don't have live ability to show you, but it takes our King County infographic template and has drag and drop capability for a city to put in the things that are most important to it. So I just put 2 examples here, urban city and rural city. And you can see they're a little bit different. The urban city, I'm postulating it has more concrete, so it has increased heat, heavy rain events, maybe shows a little space needle there, and it's on the coast. And then a rural city, such as Snoqualmie, might have more concerns about river or wildfire or snow. City of Kenmore, and there's more than what's up there. City of Kenmore, of course, might have concerns about some water quality, recreation ability, infrastructure. You are on Lake Washington, so things like that would have a concern. And I would definitely, I would love to show any of you, or I'll work directly with Richard to show this infographic.
One thing I just want to add here, so of the examples Rachel's giving, when we do community scale emissions inventory of greenhouse gases, or putting together an infographic like this, kind of pulling together the science that's behind it, doing bill analysis and sharing that analysis and talking points, the consultant work she mentioned, all of those things are things that cities in K4C have access to and they don't have to create by themselves. So it's either work that King County is doing and sharing with that coalition or work that we have done jointly. And I think the great thing is no one city has to come up with it on their own. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Right.
So how do you see these graphics being utilized in day-to-day city life?
Oh, we share it with, there's a lot of events that we would go to, we might table. We, at King County, we have it on our website, our own infographic, which is maybe very broad, but it's to speak to constituents, to speak to what's important from a climate change perspective for your city, what the city is doing to mitigate or prepare for impacts. And then there's also a section, it's not on here, which talks about what you can do as a resident in order to reduce carbon emissions.
So, but I guess I don't understand, what would we do with this with the city, or is this strictly for your organization? I'm trying to understand how we incorporate that into anything we do.
So I could give you an example, like City of Snoqualmie, they're a member, and their mayor, when I've heard him speak at public events about kind of why they care about climate change, why are they engaging in these issues, the impacts he'll talk about are flooding, loss of snowpack, and wildfire threat. They have one planner who does sustainability work, applies for grants, does a lot of different things. They just don't have the capacity to put something like this together. And so we all saw a shared interest in, like, it's kind of nice to have consistent look and feel. So basically, Rachel took the graphics King County had put together and then a city like Snoqualmie can basically take this very quickly, kind of pull these blocks and put together materials so that if they're having an Earth Day event, they can bring that out and it's tailored to their city, or if they want to put it on their webpage, they can, but they don't have to create it from scratch.
So the other thing that we started in 2018 that we continue to work on, and I would love to have a Kenmore case study, are these exactly that, case studies. And this is an example where King County created the template. We have a graphic artist who takes the materials and drops it into the template so we have a consistent look and feel. This is up on our K4C website, and it's also, of course, available for every city to use. And again, it's another example of how are we, the city, either responding to your citizens' concerns, or how are we reducing emissions and reducing money. And you can see they're all different. Tukwila produced a case study talking about their tree canopy focus, something of real importance to them and to their constituents. City of Mercer Island has this, they have a great Lime bike and Uber last mile program that they piloted to deal with the park and ride, because it gets full at 6 o'clock in the morning and Mercer Island residents can't park there. So they created this mobility pilot. Apparently has gone very well. So they wanted to highlight that and share the learnings from that. Bellevue retrofit their LED lights and really improve their light quality and are saving a lot of money as opposed to those sodium halide ones. And then we put one for our aquatic center, actually, a very large system on our aquatic center. Pools, as you know, take a lot of energy, and it really helps shave that peak off. So this is something that, I'd love to work with staff to put one together and share the story of what Kenmore is doing. You've got this beautiful LEED building here. You could profile that and how much money, how much electricity and energy I'm hoping it saves you. Then let's talk about 2019. At the end of 2018, we had an elected official summit. And we did something a little different. We did a dot exercise to see what was important to the elected officials. And we literally gave everyone dots on a little sheet of paper, and we had different topics on the boards that you can see here, and we had folks put dots on the board. And it was a great exercise. Everyone was excited about a lot of things, but the things that rose to the top were, again, tree canopy was one, mobility was another, energy efficiency, of course, was another, and then green building. So a lot of things. So we're building the 2019 plan off of this. We're doing it now. And so where we're going on this is both developing some communications materials and looking to expand outreach and speak to all K4C city councils, very much like we're doing today, to speak about how you can be involved. We're looking to revamp materials to be able to better speak to residents. And again, that's not something that I at King County will be developing. It's something that all of the staff members and all of the that participate in the K4C will be developing, and we're going to get some consultant help in order to make it really nice and professional and effective. We are also looking at a gap analysis on building codes in order to work on commercial building codes to get them towards what do we need to do for increased efficiency. And also looking at some support for the national code, ICE, the International Code Consortia voting process, which is this year. So that's another one of our priorities that we're looking at. So then lastly, what's been a big priority so far this year has been, our legislative outreach. And I mentioned that in our clean electricity pathways, the consultants discovered in the study that we can do everything at the local government level with incentives and codes and leading by example. But in order to get to that 90% renewable electricity goal, state level action is imperative. And so several elected officials, you can see a picture there with Mercer Island Councilmember Bruce Bassett, Burien Councilmember Nancy Tosta, Megan Smith, and then Snoqualmie Mayor Matt Larson speaking. They had just testified in Olympia on a beautiful winter day. So we really worked hard this year in the session, and we testified 9 times, made 9 trips down to Olympia. There were several, there was a shared letter in support of the 100% clean by 2045 bill. And then there was an op-ed that King County Councilmember Balducci signed on, Snoqualmie Mayor Larson, and Mercer Island Councilmember Bruce Bassett also signed on, really targeted to a bunch of East Side readers. It was in the Snoqualmie Valley Record and several of those kind of East Side and Southeast newspapers. And so testified both on clean energy, building efficiency, and appliance efficiency, and also clean fuels. All those align with our shared interests that are in something that we also develop every year in the elected official summits. And I did a little math today when I was thinking about this 100% clean by 2045 bill that passed. That bill calls for 80% clean energy, or actually carbon, it's 80% clean energy by 2030. You can offset or do alternate compliance methods for the other 20%. But if we get 80% for the utility PSE that currently has less than 80% renewable electricity, that will bring our countywide renewable electricity percentage up from 63% where it is now, up to 86%. So we will almost get there. We can cover the rest of that gap probably by efficiency and on-site solar and distributed generation that we do throughout the community. So don't quote me on those numbers. It was somewhat a little bit of back of the envelope, but it's a pretty good calculation. But so it just shows the importance of the state level to get to where we want to go. So lastly, what are opportunities for you to get involved? We have 2 elected official summits coming up. June 10th, I hope that you have all gotten invitations. They were supposed to go out some time ago, so I'm hoping that you got them. We would love to see all of you there and participate. We will be going over some of the results of the technical analysis that we're doing right now on our greenhouse gas emissions inventories and the wedge diagram, which will help frame. You need to know where you are to know where you're going to go. So we will talk about a lot of that. We'll talk about the legislative session a lot too. Then the next one is on October 7th. The agenda for that one is a little less set, it's further off, obviously, but we will be bringing forward our proposed King County 2020 Strategic Climate Action Plan, really to get input from our partners on where that plan goes. So that's opportunities for elected officials. We do have monthly staff steering committee meetings, and I know that I think you called in last month, and we continue to move forward on those and progress on the work. And then, as I've mentioned, our Strategic Climate Action Plan, we will be having topic-based workshops. We're developing the calendar now. Those will be out for the public. We are trying to set them geographically diverse. One in the north end is definitely on the agenda, one on the east side, and one on the south, to talk about. In some cases, it might be broader topics, but some might be very focused on, green building codes, and those might be a smaller audience. But we do want to have public meetings, and of course, would look forward to have Kenmore residents there. So I think that's all I had, and we're happy to open it up for questions. But thank you for listening.
Questions? Councilmember Shrubnik.
Just a quick question. On the wedge diagram, do you either provide that kind of analysis for cities or TA for cities to do that themselves?
So the wedge analysis that we're preparing would be at the community scale. I think where it's helpful, though, is as you look across the community, it gives you a good sense of the sources of your emissions. And then when we start to map out what are our priority shared actions, which things are going to be most impactful. So I think it can inform your local wedge analysis, but it wouldn't actually conduct it.
The Scope 5 software that I talked about is a good way to look at your individual city emissions and where they are. So that's something that I'd be happy to work with your staff on more.
The other thing we can offer too is King County we just finished a deep dive into our operational emissions. So, you know, the emissions from our buildings, facilities, the fuel we use in our vehicles. And so then you see a local government profile. It's very deep. And basically we were looking at how can we go further faster? We are not reducing emissions quickly enough. And so we'd be happy to share that as well.
Councilmember Curtis.
This is definitely not a policy level comment. It's in the weeds. But I was driving back from Spokane this last week, and as I came through Ryegrass, I saw all those windmills up there. I said, you know, if we put a bunch of solar up here, because there's a lot of sunshine here as well as wind, they got the same transmission lines, we could shove more electricity down those things. Get two for the price of one.
And that's on the Puget Sound Energy Green Direct that Rachel was mentioning. That's exactly what they're doing with the wind farm, is billing it close to transmission. The cost for that actually came out pretty darn low. And so for King County, for the projections we've done, and for the 8 cities in King County that have signed on, we project we'll save a significant amount of money on our electricity bill and we'll cut the emissions. So it's great.
Well, Councilmember, you're correct. It's not a policy question, but many times there seems to be resistance to a lot of ideas that make a lot of maybe economic or climate sense. And in Eastern Washington, there seems to be some frictions there that I think folks are still working out.
Any other questions? Councilmember Smith.
I do have, and it kind of touches on that. Do you publish much or put out much information on the economic aspect of it? Because I know oftentimes there's, whether it's in support or it's trying to address concerns that somebody may have, I know oftentimes the economics plays a role in the decision-making at a much higher level than sometimes, I think it's hard to argue with anything you talked about tonight, but when economics come into it, it becomes a different set of issues and questions and answers for people. And I just, if there's anything you can comment on the economic side and oftentimes the cost-benefit aspect.
So that's something, like you said, very important. And as Megan mentioned, the Green Direct analysis. So I actually have a finance background. I used to do commercial lending, and then I did project finance for many years. So I'm very comfortable with that type of analysis. So I ran the numbers to compare what the predicted rate of the cost per kilowatt hour it was going to be under the Green Direct program versus what estimated what our known costs for conventional energy is versus what are predicted escalation rates as provided by the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. So I ran those numbers out and feel very comfortable. Those lines will cross in a couple of years, and we will start saving money. And that was really important to our council. That this is not, it had a clear policy benefit, but we needed to make sure that we were being good stewards of our taxpayers' money. So we look at energy efficiency that same way. And so in energy efficiency, we talk very much about payback and ROI and how long before you start really seeing the benefits of that. And over the long term, locking in those savings, both on the renewable side and the efficiency side, it's really good for your financial picture. I mean, similar to what the city manager from Kirkland was talking about, making sure you've got those expenses aren't going to skyrocket. By having efficient systems or consistent pricing on a renewable supply, you're really kind of locking in that expense line at a lower level than if you have something really volatile.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this update. All right, next item on the agenda is Regional Water Supply Resiliency. Al Nesselin, General Manager of Northshore Utility District. Ethan Maiefski, Director of Maintenance and Operation with Northshore Utility District, and Alex Chen, Water Planning and Progress Management Division Director at Seattle Public Utilities. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, Ethan Maiefski will not be joining us tonight. We will not, in the interest of time, have an opportunity to talk about the redundancy Northshore Utility District has incorporated through its years of hard work in discussing that tonight. We will focus on the regional water supply. To remember, again, first of all, I'm Al Nelson with Northshore Utility District, just introduced. And we are the fourth largest special purpose district in the state of Washington. We serve over half the city of Kirkland, all the city of Kenmore, as you know, parts of Lake Forest Park, parts of Bothell, and a little bit of Moonville. So, including Evergreen Hospital and Totem Lake, we've certainly seen the growth out there in Totem Lake.
Any questions? Trying to figure out how to phrase this. How dependent is Northshore Utility District on PUD, or Seattle Public Utilities, in the water supply?
So I would say that North Shore Utility District is highly dependent on our source of water supply. However, we are, as far as providing emergency water and preserving that water, we have, I think, the last calculation was a couple months of storage supply for critical distribution of water, and we have plans in place for that as well. About North Shore is our location. We have some opportunities there off the Seattle supply, with Lake Forest Park Reservoir being right up on top of the hill there, as well as a connection with Tessel, east side supply line, which is another redundant line. So we really are benefiting from location, and so the answer is kind of twofold. It is highly dependent on the source of supply that we have. We do have been in ties with other agencies, but for our primary water, it is the toll.
And I think if I've heard correctly, there is a supply that's available to North Shore? A few
Well-
million gallons,
I'm sorry?
a few million gallons per?
Yeah, so what we do, we've got plans in place in which we have some automated valves at the base of each one of our reservoirs and stand tanks or stand pipes. And we do have plans in place. We're currently working with an advanced, what's called an early advanced warning system called Shake Alert, that will actually notify us prior to the ground shaking. It would allow us to preserve that, maximize the preservation of that water stored in those tanks, so we can do some water. Also looking at other opportunities, currently working with Bassett University on their elevated storage tank, and partnering with them as a potential additional source, and we're looking at other opportunities as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little concerned with a major catastrophe, the possibility of one becoming so dependent upon one source, and would sort of leave us hanging in a dire circumstances, so.
I certainly can appreciate that. I'd be thrilled to actually do another additional presentation. I think Rob and I talked a little bit about that we can share more of what we're doing internally as a distribution system.
Yeah, I certainly would certainly be interested. We've got a great working relationship together, and it's nice to, we all understand, so. Any other questions? Councilmember Marshall?
Approximately where does the Tolt River pipeline run through Kenmore? I think I've forgotten. And then how close is it to the Brightwater pipe?
So you recall the, you know where our office is? Of course. Okay, so the path that's right through there? Oh, yeah. And that's the Tolt line right through there. So the Tolt 1 and 2 actually passes through that location. Show it on the straight line portion north of the lake up there. And so, I'm sorry, what was the other portion?
Is that also where Brightwater is?
Brightwater is actually a little further north. They actually run the line from Portal, the Portal that's right off of 73rd. And it runs from North Creek, the other Portal, if you go to Bothell and Bonneville there, or before you go to Bonneville, on 195th, almost 195th, heading almost to Point Wells. You can kind of draw a line through there. And so that's not the line I'm saying.
Wonderful. If there are no more questions, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Betcha. All right. Next item on the agenda is citizen comments. This is an opportunity for you to express your concerns on issues that are important to you about our community. And we ask that you please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And if the clerk would please call the first person.
Nadia Regina Silver.
Hello, Council, and it's Nadia Reina Silver, and I live at 18230 70th Lane Northeast. It's a 5-minute walk from here, north of here, actually. And the reason why I'm here is Happy Earth Day, and on that note, I'm really grateful that you guys went and put the doggy bag sticks on the walk back there. Yay! But now we have a problem. No one's throwing the trash in the trash. We have a stump over there by the auction house where the Northshore utility is also, and that stump is overflowed. People have mistaken the stump for a stump-looking trash can. And other concerned residents have just cleaned it out. The actual auction house staff has actually cleaned it out too. And quite frankly, we're very sick of it. Friday I was on a walk and it was just poop bags galore, like a cache of poop bags for a poop leprechaun. It was ridiculous. But that's just like a large part of the problem because there's all along there. So yay, you put the bags there, thank you. Please keep doing that. But we kind of need some trash management up and down that area. My house literally looks on the whole area, and when there's no leaves on the trees, I can see all the way down to the school bus stop. Emphasis on what I'm saying, the kids are picked up at middle school and high school at that exact corner, mine included. So kids will do dumb stuff, and kids will play with poop. And it's unhealthy, and it's not good. On another note related to the same strip, there's also found some very unsafe needles. Now, I know we have some safe injection spots around Kenmore, but for some reason, that's what I was told.
No.
Okay. Well, can we have that? That would be nice. Because there have been some needles. I don't know if it's a diabetic needle. I don't know what's in it. I just don't know exactly how we can explain to people how to report that, because I was told always the health department handles something like that. Because you don't touch bloody needles or potentially used needles or stuff like that. You just don't handle it, and I would just call the police. So I don't think the public is really clear on how to handle that either. So, small comment, well, I've got like 30 seconds. If we can try to get more Latina and Latino representation, like at least some ready literature for Spanish people, even if they're not going to be here. I just feel, even though as a semi-bilingual person, I think it's important that we try to include linguistically as many people. If you only put out 15 to your 30, at least have it for them. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Silver. We appreciate your comments.
Vicki Grayland.
Hi, I'm Vicki Grayland. I live in Kenmore, and happy Earth Day. As you know, I'm a Sierra Club volunteer and also a volunteer for People for Climate Action. And today was a huge day in our state legislature. I'm very grateful to our legislature. Our representatives have been on top of this legislation all through the session, and I'm very grateful. I'm also grateful to all the volunteers who've put in a lot of hours, and to King County, the staff has been there, and our reps have been there. Today's bill that passed, Senate Bill 5116, is really, I consider, the jewel in the crown for fixing climate change and for the whole year's legislation for the environment. So I also want to invite you to People for Climate Action's May 11th Cities Climate, our summit. We're going to have a former city planner from Portland. Portland has done a great job. They haven't had the benefit of this today's great legislation. They've done it inch by inch. And it would be a great opportunity to learn how they've done it and to talk to her. She's now retired, and from that and moving on to other things at a national level. It's at the Mercer Island Community Center, 9 a.m. registration. It runs until noon, and the final part of it will be breakout sessions for each town, and Kenmore will have its own breakout session, and I invite you to join that. It'll be a great opportunity to talk to our citizens. I also wanted to talk about something that's close to my heart, and that's soil. And from Climate's action plan, it says soil also provides important potential for additional carbon sequestration. Deeper soils and unpaved soils provide additional and more stable carbon storage, and wetlands provide a particularly high soil carbon density. Preserving and restoring the urban forest and understory, healthy soils and wetlands helps slow climate change while also providing water retention, wildlife habitat, and opportunities to grow food. I don't want to be a broken record on this, but I still want to say artificial turf should not be installed anywhere at any time from this day forward. We need every piece of soil to sequester carbon, to slow climate change, and to provide a good future for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grayland.
Eric Admin.
Hi there, Eric Admin, 7815 Northeast 192nd Street. Nice to see you all. We've had some very Earth Day appropriate presentations as well as comments, and I actually have some environmental related comments myself as well, both kind of along the lines of thanks to the city as well as some encouragement for some additional action. So in addition to being a Kenmore resident, I'm also president of a nonprofit organization called Snow King Watershed Council. Our group works to monitor, protect, and restore local streams and natural areas. I got involved in this because I live on a local creek, Little Swamp Creek in Kenmore. Recently, I received the spring 2019 Kenmore quarterly newsletter, and in it, I was happy to see a feature called Spotlight on Surface Water Management. And in fact, as I looked carefully, as we were reading through this, we were like, hey, that picture, that's right out in front of our house where they're doing samples of the water quality out of Little Swamp Creek. So I really appreciate the messaging from the city about surface water, what it means, how it affects our local streams in Lake Washington, what the city is doing to protect water quality, and what citizens can do. And there was also a nice feature in here about ways that streams and wetlands keep us and our environment healthy, which they also add to our quality of life. In recent years, Snow King Watershed Council has partnered with the city in a number of ways. The city gave us a grant to help with wetland studies to protect the Swamp Creek watershed. We wrote a grant for streamside restoration along Swamp Creek and Squires Landing Park, and the city was a partner in that, has now taken over stewardship of that site. And the city also partnered with us in putting on a Swamp Creek Watershed Forum here a couple years ago. The city has also taken action to protect my favorite local stream. So a little over a year ago, Little Swamp Creek had a fish passable culvert installed underneath Northeast 192nd Street. And also in this newsletter, I was happy to see that the new surface water management fee schedule is going to permit Little Swamp Creek relocation project to move forward. Currently, a portion of that stream runs in a roadside ditch along 80th Northeast, which affects water quality and also potentially flooding. Also wanted to let you know that we have a Snow King Watershed Council has a community-based water monitoring program with volunteers monitoring water quality on multiple stream sites in Kenmore. Currently, we have 3 monitoring locations on Swamp Creek, 2 on Little Swamp Creek, and 1 on Chet Shottle, otherwise known as 0056 in Log Boom Park. And I think we've got an additional opportunity to partner with the city and help with their outreach goals on these. So I just want to thank Richard Sawyer, Maureen, Debbie, Rob, Lori, Nancy, other city staff that I've worked with for the partnerships to date. And I just want to leave you with one food for thought, which is maybe the city of Kenmore could have a tree canopy focus case study as part of the K4C initiative, because I think we've lost a lot of trees with all the new construction, but I think that's also a place where Kenmore could really work on our climate situation. Thank you.
Mayor, there's nobody else signed up.
Anybody else wishing to be heard? Anybody else? Ms. Silver, thank you very much for your comments. I know the city manager heard those, and we'll look into it and see what we can do about better pickup and more trash can options. Ms. Grayland, thank you very much for your comments and the opportunities you've presented to us. And Mr. Adam, thank you. And I think we are doing a tree canopy study. This is something we were concerned about, and I think we talked about it at our retreat, and I believe that is moving forward. Yes, it is. So anyway, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is a consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is business agenda. Consider options and provide direction to staff on notification of rent increases. Ms. Bent and Ms. Anderson.
Good evening, Council. So a little bit of background. If you remember at your January 2018 retreat, Council asked for some information about rent notification increases and asked staff to bring back some information. And last July, we did just that. We brought you back some information about what other cities were doing and some options. And the direction from Council was, please bring back some information. How could we have rent notification increase for giving 90 days notification if rent was increased more than 10%? So that's why we're back this evening. And you might ask, or maybe you wouldn't, but why did we wait so long to bring this back? And the short answer is that there were other work program items that took priority. We were working very much so on the mobile home community project and the critical area regulation project, so that's the reason why there was a delay from July to now. But we're back. So we're here to talk about that and also give you an update on some recent action in the legislature. So I'll now turn it over to Laurie. Thank you.
Good evening. So Debbie has kind of given you a preview here, but you asked us to come back with a notification of rent increase that would be for 90 days if there was going to be a 10% increase in the rent. In the meantime, the state legislature has passed a bill that would require a 60-day notice of rent increase across the board without any relationship to how much the increase is. That has passed both the Senate and the House and is on the governor's desk waiting for signature. So it's not law yet, but that is going on at the state level and would go into effect this summer if the governor signs it. So the city's municipal code currently doesn't contain any standards related to landlord-tenant relationships. And so we would, with a new ordinance, be developing a new chapter. And there were a couple of items as we move forward. The 90 days at a 10% increase is, of course, a basic standard. But there are other things that we would also have to look at. And that's why it's on your agenda tonight. To get some feedback so we know which way to go if you wish to continue with this approach. And the first issue, there are two issues. One is enforcement, and the other is notification of tenants of their new, of these new standards. And there are two ways to approach it. One is enforcement by the city, in which case the city would take a proactive role if someone were to call in and notify us that their landlord hadn't given them appropriate notice. Then the city presumably would go through the standard steps, calling the landlord, letting them know that they hadn't met the standard, and requesting that they make the change. In other words, that the 90 days would, I suppose, start with notice of violation. Anyway, so we would develop specific code-related language with regard to enforcement. That, of course, is a work program item and would require some additional staff time to enforce. The other approach, which some other cities have taken, is to consider this an independent legal action. So if a tenant had felt that their landlord hadn't given appropriate notice, it would be as a private legal matter between the tenant and the landlord, and the city would not step in the role of an enforcer. So council direction on that topic is requested. And then the second piece of it is education of tenants. So in some communities, I think it was Tacoma, they require that the landlord provide this requirement for notice to the tenant, and that the tenant actually sign something that they then provide to the city that says, we received this information, and we know that the landlord then has distributed the information to their tenants. If we were to require that, we would put that in, again, the municipal code. The other approach is to provide general public information through our standard channels, the newsletters, the website, et cetera, just to generally inform people of this obligation. So those are the two policy issues in front of you tonight. If you wish to go ahead, again, I can call out that because of the state law, if 60 days were something you were interested in and you didn't want the city to address this 90-day requirement, that's another option. But the 90 days certainly could extend the 60-day time period. One council member had asked me to look a little into the Portland situation. Portland has a 90-day requirement in their state. And I couldn't specifically find information about why 90 days was chosen, but I did read really interesting public testimony about the whole rent notification issue. And there was a lot of testimony that dealt with the fact that if you have a fairly tight housing market, 30 days, you may be able to find some place to rent, but is it close to where you work? Does your child have to change schools? So there are a number of ramifications that make a longer time period more beneficial to the tenants, and that is why Portland went in that direction. So with that, I am available for questions.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Quick question. So what does the state legislation say about the enforcement and education pieces?
It doesn't say anything. In the new section that's being written. It would fall under the Landlord-Tenant Act, and so I am not exactly sure how that is enforced, but it would be state law, and whether you would have to contact the Attorney General, or again, whether you went to your it was a private action. I don't think, in other words, that there's a state agency that's enforcing the Landlord-Tenant Act.
So a little follow-up then. So if we were okay with the 60, I mean, we wouldn't have latitude to make different choices around notification and education, right? It would be, would be whatever the state.
No, I mean, if the city wanted to put out a broadcast that says new state law is requiring a 60-day notice of rent increase, we want you all to know that. I mean, the city could certainly do that. I don't think the city would want to step into the role of writing an enforcement section over state law.
Deputy Mayor? Oh, Mr. City Attorney?
Well, I just had a comment on Councilmember Strubnik's question. As some of you may know, the current Landlord-Tenant Act provides for a 30-day notice. And what the legislature did recently with ESHB 1440 was extend that 30-day notice to 60 days. And wanted to point out that when the state law was 30 days notice, Seattle, Tacoma, and Vancouver had a 60-day notice. So they were 30 days beyond what state law had already provided. And we're not aware of any legal challenges to those ordinances of those three cities. So I wanted to answer your question with that comment.
Deputy Mayor?
This gave me something to think about there. That's interesting. I want to thank you for bringing this together. I have to say it does look like 1440 has kind of taken away a little bit of the need, I think, for us to move forward right now, seeing as this is going into effect. It doesn't have, I'm just looking at it right now, it doesn't, it's pretty broad. It expands things by a month, which was my original suggestion. I'm perfectly happy with just moving forward with 1440, and you know, there are going to be some other tenant protections coming that will be signed coming up soon anyway. Maybe we can make it a small box in in a newsletter or something, just to kind of raise awareness for folks. But from just speaking for myself, I'm actually perfectly happy with where things are now, just to see how things play out for a bit, and we can circle back in a few years if things aren't working. But I'm generally actually happy with 1440 as it is.
I guess I'm a little concerned in giving the tenants enough time to find housing if they cannot afford the rent increase. I'm also a little concerned that we've seen instances, or we've been told of instances, where some of the rent increases are vindictive, some of the rent increases are happening without necessarily giving enough notice. And I think in order to protect, I'm looking at a lot of the senior population now that are fixed income, that can't afford really rent increases, to give them as much time as possible. One, if they want to bring legal action, or they want to find another place to live, I really want to give them as much time as possible. As far as code enforcement, I think that we really should have independent legal action as the option. And the other one that you were curious about was education of tenants. I think it's the property owner's responsibility to notify, like they do in Tacoma. There's enough background with Portland and with Tacoma that we don't really necessarily need to reinvent the wheel here, but we really need to do everything we can to protect the tenants. Councilmember Curtis.
I'm inclined to stick with the state's recommendation, assuming this does pass as we expect. Clearly, 30 days isn't enough. 60 days, I think, is a good improvement. I guess my question on 90, I mean, where does it end? Does anybody have any data that 90 days is better than 60 days? Does it actually benefit anyone other than just seeming like a good idea? So maybe 4 months is better than 3 months. I don't know. But I'm inclined just to say, hey, the state has made a good step in a good direction, and us not to get into it. I really, really don't want the city to get into enforcement. I mean, we've seen how challenging enforcement is in general of the laws that we already have in Kenmore. Staff time, legal time, the money considered, enforcement is just a landmine. So I'd rather leave this at the state level.
Councilman Marshall.
I generally concur with the mayor, but on knowledge of the tenants, I wanted to confirm with our city attorney what I think he must know about general evictions practice. And that would be basically, okay, say a landlord violates whatever timeline we set, and nevertheless, they're bringing an eviction action. They got to bring an eviction action. They've got to go down before the commissioner in King County, and that's downtown Seattle. And at that point, if the tenant isn't otherwise educated or is in financial need, they can apply for assistance from Housing Justice, who assigns them an attorney. And you can bet that if in the city code X number of days is required for notice, that attorney will object, and the person will at that point not get evicted, because I know a commissioner is going to say, yes, on top of the state law, cities are free to impose or require further notice, and then that person will be okay. So at least at that time, there's certainly education that would go on at the latest right there. You'd hope people would know before that. So it doesn't take care of all the education for sure and everybody's rights up front, but that is a protection. I just wanted to maybe confirm.
I agree with what you said.
Okay.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yeah, I'd still like to see it 90 days. I could be okay with 1440, but I'd rather see 90. I definitely don't want the city to be involved in the enforcement, and the education should be the landlord and not the city as well. So those are just my opinions.
So Councilmember Danuski? I didn't hear the last part.
The education on landlords, not the city.
Should be on the landlord.
Correct. That's my opinion.
And I think one of the other things here was if independent legal action, if we go that route, there needs to be a provision there similar to Vancouver, that while this is going, they can't do impose late fees or eviction. Councilmember Shrubnik.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Smith also has a comment, sorry. Just kind of a point of order, what are we being asked? Because it feels like we're kind of going
To
down
look at
person
code
by person.
enforcement and education of
Right,
tenants.
are we looking at a vote on something?
We're looking at giving them direction to what to prepare to bring back to us.
One of the
As a
options is do
vote?
nothing.
Right, so I think that I guess the first question would be, do you still want to continue with the 90 days notice is the first question. And if the answer to that is yes, the second question would then be, and what do you want the city's role to be in terms of enforcement and education? So if you go on the 90-day path, or depending on that vote goes, the other alternative then is to say do nothing. We'll stick with, assume that the state legislation goes into effect, and we'll see how things go. So those are the two paths that you have.
Councilmember Smith.
On that note, I would support the 60 days, and I think that makes sense, and it makes sense to be consistent with the state law. I'd also be in favor of independent legal action rather than city enforcement, and especially knowing that it's highly likely that there will be further changes to tenant-landlord relationships coming down the line. I think if we go down that path of enforcement on this, then we better expect to go down on the path of enforcement on a number of other, of which I think some of them are not necessarily positive changes at all. And it does, I would like to hope that we don't overstretch where the state already has a number of laws and regulations regarding tenant-landlord regulations that make sense, and the more we pile on as a city that deviates from that, the more likely you are to lose mom-and-pop landlord owners that don't want to deal with trying to keep up on everything and the risk of being sued, and it becomes more of an institutional investment. And then it becomes a cash flow issue and an economic equation for every tenant. And I would say the more we can let the state regulate it, the better.
Deputy Mayor.
Well, after listening to my colleagues, I'm going to retract my previous statement. If the will is there to have a conversation about 90 days, I'm in support of looking at that, especially if the city attorney believes that maybe with the update to the state law that 90 days might be more tenable legally than it was prior when we were at 30 days. So if that's the case, I'm interested in having that discussion.
Councilmember Curtis.
I'd like to make a motion that we not create a 90-day ordinance and that we stay with the state's regulations.
I second that.
All right, motion on the table to stick with 60 days and eliminate 90 days.
I think he may need to clarify, because he said stick with the state's regulation. Right now, the state regulation is 30 days. You may want to specifically state 60 days, if that's your intent.
That is my intent, assuming the 60-day law is passed.
So then the motion would be to implement the 60 days and not the 90 days. Okay, that's the first, that's the first step. All right. So the motion in front of us is then to use 60 days as the term. And there is a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes, to 60 days.
Deputy Mayor Herbig,
No.
Mayor Baker,
No.
Councilmember Shrubnik,
Yes?
Councilmember Marshall,
No.
Councilmember Curtis,
Yes?
Councilmember Danuski.
No.
Failed, 4-3.
Or 3. All right. So then, as long as we're on this, and we want to get the 60-day and 90-day, there was a vote on the 60, so I'm going to make a motion on the 90.
Could I just add one point of clarification?
Yes.
The original council direction was 90 days if there was a 10% increase or more over the course of a year. That was what was done elsewhere, so I'm not sure whether you're talking about flat 90 days or 90 days only with that amount of rent increase.
With the 10% that's written there.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said I was the 90 days with the 10%.
Is that
if
what
it's
you were
a-
thinking?
Yeah, just like it's in here.
Okay.
What we given direction.
So we're looking at 90 days with a 10% increase.
That would still give the 60-day protection for everybody
Otherwise, you
under
get
state law.
60 days. Right?
Yeah.
All right. So the chair will entertain a motion for 90 days with a 10% increase and 60 days for anything less. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Shrevenick,
No.
Councilmember Marshall,
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis,
No.
Mayor Baker,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
No.
Councilmember Danuski.
Yes.
Passed, 4-3.
All right, so 90 at 10% and anything less is 60. All right, code enforcement. Do we want to go enforcement by the city or independent legal action? I heard the most here for independent legal action, so the chair will entertain a motion.
So moved for independent legal action.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Yes. I really, really hope the city does not want to get into code enforcement on these issues. They're so much more complex than I think any of us realize, and it will be a massive drain on resources, not just the enforcement side, but on the legal side too. And I really would hate to see us go down that path.
So the motion on the table is independent legal action. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Clerk,
Mayor, what's the wording on that motion? So what's the wording exactly?
that we would, for code enforcement, we do independent legal action, the way the staff has presented it to us.
Okay.
So clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Shrevenick,
Yes.
Mayor Baker,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig,
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall,
Yep.
Councilmember Curtis,
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski.
Yes.
Passed.
So on this same note that we just passed, is there any objection to have staff look into what Vancouver did during the legal action? There can't be any late fees or eviction notices. Is there any objection to that?
Well, can I just ask, so because I don't know enough about that, but I would assume if there is, that means then the city has to enforce that, right?
No, I don't think necessarily.
So let's say somebody does do that during that period.
Then I think they can go back with their independent legal action and contact their attorney that they're working with and say, can't do that. Councilmember Marshall?
And also
I
the
see
city.
the attorney side coming in.
Well, and the city attorney can probably confirm that if there's retaliatory action by a landlord, that would be part of a counterclaim in an eviction action, usually. And then again, when you want to evict somebody and the landlord's done something wrong, it goes down in King County Superior Court, and they can bring that issue up at that point. I'm not saying that's, the end of all the the discussion of it, but that is the option now, legally.
The situation that we would be faced with apparently would be, because I'm reading from the staff report too, that our ordinance would say that if the notification was given less than the time period, then the increase would be unenforceable. So essentially what would happen, speculating then, is that someone, because we're not going to be involved in enforcement, someone will have to bring an action, either the landlord or the tenant, if the landlord tries to enforce the rent increase. That would be a private cause of action between the two parties.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, and I would also just add that with the affordable housing crisis kind of hitting the state and becoming a large issue in the legislature this year, there have been other bills that have gone through beyond just this one that may actually touch on this a little bit at the state level. I can't speak for certain, though, on specific bills right now, but I know there's been quite a few bills kind of in this area that have made it through the process or are still working their way through the process. So we may actually not know for another month what the landlord-tenant relationship looks like until things wrapped up in Olympia. So
Yeah, and I guess what I was looking for was staff, when they're preparing stuff to bring back to us, that this be one thing that we look at and can say yes or no. But at least we have a little bit better understanding of it. Councilmember Shrubnik.
I guess I would prefer that we not have staff spend their time until we know what the landscape looks like. It just doesn't seem like a good use of resources, but that's just my opinion.
So how are we going to know what the landscape looks like if we don't look at it?
When, as Councilmember Herbeck discussed.
This session is over or the next session?
Well, if we're moving forward with the 90 days, it would have to be when this session is over. So if they pass something related to the landlord-tenant, it'd be this session.
Next one is education of tenants. It's a general agreement to have the landlords or the property owners notify the tenants in writing, similar to, what city was the one that was doing that one? Ms. Anderson?
Tacoma?
Was it Tacoma? Yeah, Tacoma. Councilmember Smith?
So just so you know, I mean, if we all of a sudden put the onus now on the landlord for this, you know what'll happen is when they pass new legislation on tenant landlord stuff, then stuff will continually get piled on, and then it'll all fall back onto the landlord again. And this gets back to when I was talking about it turns it into a business machine rather than a neighbor trying to help a neighbor, or a more simpler tenant-landlord relationship. And so I guess my point is, well, I would rather keep it simple. I think we have mechanisms in place, and
We're presented with two alternatives here. One, have the landlord do it, two, the city would do the education.
well, right now, who educates the tenant?
I don't know that anybody does.
Right, that's my point. And so I would say, and if we continually take the responsibility away from the tenant to have to do anything to even remotely educate themselves, it's the same thing with the mobile home thing. What happened? Well, they have a bigger font in their lease, and it doesn't get read, or they don't understand it, and then they still sign the lease anyway. And except now what you're doing is you're creating a situation where if the landlord doesn't provide it, or let's just say it isn't exactly as it was presented in state regulation or city regulation, well then now maybe the lease becomes void because it wasn't exactly right. So there's a whole nother slew of legal implications. And I would say the more we do for people, the less they're going to do for themselves. And so there's got to be a point where you've got to take some ownership in understanding what you're doing. And I think we're being fair about some of the notification timeframes, but there is a point where if you're mature enough to sign a lease, then you need to be mature enough to understand what you're signing too.
Right, but this is about our passing policy and notifying the tenant of the new policy. So there's two ways of doing that, right? The city can notify, or the tenant, the landlord can notify. So, anyway, Councilmember Curtis.
I would argue that there's a third option, and that's let the state do it. So right now, the state is responsible. There is a tenant, a whole bunch of tenant-related ordinances. And I think this is really complicated. And for us to get in the middle of it, I think is just the wrong thing to do. If people really want to know, they can look at the state law, and that's the only way we're going to stay up to date. Otherwise, we'll create laws, and the next legislature, they'll create some more laws. Then we'll be out of date, and then we'll have to update ours. I think it'll be a never-ending source of chaos if we try to create laws that are going to ultimately be overridden by the state laws. So there would be a place they could get educated. We can put it in our newsletter. We can educate in lots of ways without putting it in this ordinance. So we don't want to ignore education, but I don't want to see it in this ordinance. I want to say, what I'd like to see is the education will be done at the state level, whatever's in the law. So I don't want us to create a whole new section for this.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
For all those reasons, and I totally agree with Councilmember Curtis. And one of the reasons I was reluctant on the 90 days is, again, I don't want us to be inconsistent with the state if the state is putting this information out. And I also think the further you get down this road, the less interested landlords are going to be to participate in Kenmore. And we really want good landlords here. We are, trying to get more affordable units, all of these things. I mean, it's a balance between protections of tenants and wanting to get what you want from the landlords, and that, I think those are both really important things.
Councilmember Danuski.
Well, we can't have the state do the notification because there isn't going to be a state law for 90 days. That's a city law, so I don't see how that would work as much. But I guess I would like to see the education be by the landlord, but as it's written here, I don't think that we need to have the landlord get something signed and turn it into the city. I don't think we need to go down that, but have the landlord, notify. But I just don't think that you need to get the signature and all that. Make it easier.
Ms. Anderson? You have anything?
Oh, I didn't raise my hand, but no. No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay. So then I guess what we've decided is 90 days and independent legal action. Okay.
And did you come to a conclusion on the education piece?
No, there is no motion, I don't believe, and there doesn't seem to be agreement on it. So unless you want a motion on it, we can do that.
I will make a motion.
Okay.
I will make a motion that we publicize it in the newsletter and we put a link on our website.
What was the second part?
Put a link on the website.
Okay.
The revised website that's.
So then the education attendance will be notification in our newsletter and a link on our website.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Councilmember Shrubnik.
Just a quick question to Councilmember Smith about what the motion is. So the link on the website would be to the state's law or to ours?
Ours.
Maybe it's not even a link, maybe it's just, it says exactly what it is that there's got to be.
About the 90 days for 10%, yeah.
Very simple. And
Okay.
it doesn't need to be
Now, the manufactured homes have 90 days, right?
Yes, they're
Wonderful.
under a separate
Right.
set of rules.
All right. Any further discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yes.
Passed.
All right. You have what you need?
Yes.
Wonderful. Next item on the agenda is staff report.
Just two quick things. Just a reminder, we have a city council meeting tomorrow, 7 o'clock. The mayor of Shoreline, city manager of Shoreline, and their administrative services directors coming tomorrow to talk about financial sustainability. Why on a Tuesday night? Why didn't they come tonight or on a Monday night? Because their council meetings are on Monday nights. So if you or the public is wondering why we're having this meeting on the day after you have a council meeting, that's why. They can't come on Mondays. But we definitely do want to hear from them and hear what they've done when it comes to financial sustainability. And I'm super excited about April 29th For the Love of Kenmore workshop. It is going to be so much fun. And my coworkers have been amazing helping us get this set up. It's no small chore to run something like this, especially if you're doing it sans Peter Kageyama and you're doing it yourself. But one thing that I think is going to make it even better than Peter Kageyama's event is Peter provides examples from other cities across the nation. Well, guess what? We have tons of examples right here in Kenmore that are going to be so fun to showcase. So I sure hope you can come. I think we're going to have a good turnout. We've gotten a lot of RSVPs already, so that's all I have.
All right. Comments, reports, initiatives. Councilmember Smith.
I would like to say thanks to Rob, or City Manager, for having these 2 nights back to back. It was really nice listening to Triplett from Kirkland, and I look forward to hearing Shoreline's perspective tomorrow night. It's good to kind of get your mind thinking in a totally different direction at times, so it's healthy.
Councilmember Marshall.
The Northshore Parks and Recreation District voted to return to its constituent entities and make the case for an additional contribution for emergency funds and emergency issues going on. Kenmore's amount, I think, was one of the, if not the lowest, one of the lowest requests, but I'm hoping to get more information or coordinating with our city manager and getting more information to you guys about that. And then secondly, I went to the St. Edward's Environmental Learning Center last public meeting up at Finn Hill Junior High, and their primary takeaway, or what I got out of it, was they're looking for private, I think, sponsorship perhaps, or mainly a real strong private funding source, and one of the main issues is going to be renovation of the gym area.
Councilmember Curtis.
Nothing to add.
Councilmember Srebnick.
Well, I just want to appreciate the organizers of the park cleanup on Saturday. I can't talk. Saturday morning at Squires, which was great. Our city manager for giving us the book, Long-Term Financial Planning for Local Government, scintillating reading. Actually, it was quite good. The last 20 pages were very helpful for listening to Kurt, and then for tomorrow, and for thinking about our sustainability plan. And I just want to call out what was sent to us very recently, the Just Get Me Started, which looks amazing. It's been apparently going on in our hangar building for a while. Suzanne Seng, getting community together to learn new skills on a volunteer basis. And it's exactly what co-creators are about. So just want to call out to come next Monday to our For the Love of Kenmore event.
Councilmember Danuski.
Nothing to add.
Deputy Mayor.
Nothing to add.
Yes, Ms. Singh came to one of our Saturday Coffee with Councils, and it was really good to have her here when she was first starting. And I'm glad to see that she's continuing. I have a meeting tomorrow at Amazon, and we have a meeting on the 13th set up with a Microsoft exec that is responsible for making decisions on the 500 million that's going to be given out to help with affordable housing. And he's coming here to Kenmore to talk to me and the city manager and planning people. And so we'll put forth a good case for Kenmore getting a little bit of that. So anyway, if there, oh, and also we've got the Love of Kenmore on the 29th, and May 13th. After that will be the next council meeting. So we will see you tomorrow night. We're adjourned.